Well, steady as she goes, we're going to continue to sail this ship into the deep waters of learning about Jesus through Matthew's gospel. And we're going to continue to not just learn about Jesus. I really want to emphasize this again, but we're really looking to learn him like one learns a closest friend. So today we're going to learn an absolutely vital lesson about Jesus, about his character and the nature of the kingdom that he proclaims and how it all relates to how we as his followers, both live in this world the Jesus way and can be his healing agents in this world that he is working to rescue. So as we dive in, a quick question. A little bit of a heavy question, but it's related to our passage today. Have you ever experienced bullying? Anyone? Yeah. Most of us, as children especially, likely have experienced bullying at one time or another, whether that be at the school, in the schoolyard, or maybe in our neighborhood with some other kids. Some of us experienced it at home. Some of us in our adult years might still experience it in our personal relationships, or in our family relationships, and our professional relationships. Bullying is often identified as some sort of aggression or use of force that seeks to dominate another person. At the heart of it is power and dominance. Now, I remember being bullied by an older student when I was in junior high school. I'd be continually publicly harassed by this guy with some humiliating name calling and some false labeling, and I'd often be physically harassed by him, shoved around, punched, pushed to the ground at times. And then one day, it was about grade 7, then one day, even as a peaceful, introverted person, I was pushed beyond my breaking point. I utterly snapped. And even in my bully's cruelty, he did show some restraint, but in that moment, I did not. Zero restraint. Without any restraint, I more than fought back. I paid back. I hurt him. A bigger, older, larger boy, and whatever was inside me, it ended up in a horrible result. I hurt him. His power and his dominance met my own bitter anger and my power and my vengeance. And in that moment, we were in a contest of power against power, violence against violence, to attempt to solve the situation. Now, this type of behavior and counter behavior has been present in the world for as long as people have been present. I think pretty much everybody here in the room held up their hand. We have an experience of this. One of the deep symptoms of sin and brokenness in this world is this misuse or abuse of power. Now, power is necessary to get things done. So it's not a bad thing. It's not bad in and of itself. But power used outside of God's design, it will cause damage, and it usually perpetuates or exacerbates issues. As God is rescuing and renewing this world, he's teaching us through Jesus how to use the power that he's given us so that all people might flourish. Now, at issues in the gospel is the identity and the character of Jesus. Who is he? What is he like? What is his nature? And how does he model a new way of handling power that heals rather than hurts? This is a big revelation of Jesus in the Gospels here. So we're going to turn to Matthew chapter 11, and we're going to learn from Jesus. So Matthew 11, starting at verse 1. We're going to go through a fairly large swath, and I'm going to break it up into chunks here, kind of like we did last time. That seemed to help a bit. Matthew 11, verse 1. Now, when Jesus had finished instructing his 12 disciples, he went from there to teach and to proclaim his message in their cities. When John heard in prison what the Messiah was doing, he sent word by his disciples and said to him, "Are you the one that is to come, or are we to wait for another?" Jesus answered them, "Go and tell John what you hear and what you see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them. Blessed is anyone who takes no offense at me." Well, here in chapter 11, Matthew tells the stories of the responses to Jesus. So as we've been going through Matthew's gospel, we've seen like chapters 4 through 7, the announcement of the kingdom, then 8 through 10, when Jesus brings the kingdom to people, and then 10, the sending of the disciples to do the same. Now here in 11, we begin this next section of Matthew where we see these responses to Jesus and to his message. And our story starts here with a surprising reaction from John the Baptist regarding Jesus and his ministry. Now, if you recall, John is Jesus' cousin. Like, they knew each other. And John knew and believed the calling that was upon his own life, the calling that his parents knew that was on his life. He knew and believed it. He knew that he believed in this calling in the words of the prophet Isaiah, that he was to prepare the way of the Lord. And John also believed that his cousin Jesus was, in fact, that Messiah that he was announcing. And Jesus, as he was going about doing the works of the kingdom, proclaiming the kingdom, he was gaining a remarkable reputation, but for seemingly doing the wrong things with the wrong people. He's hanging out with the tax collectors, the sinners, the poor. And what is he doing? He's at these gatherings, and there's meals, and there's celebration, and there's teaching, and there's healings, and then there's more meals, and celebration, and food, and all this kind of stuff. It's like, what is it? What is this guy doing? What is this guy doing? And so as John hears of what Jesus is and isn't doing, he's puzzled, and he's filled with these doubts. He's like, "Are you the one? Like, what are you doing? What's going on here with your ministry? Like, when are you getting started with the Messiah thing? Like, this is nice, this is fun, but let's get the show going on here. We're waiting for this. Like, was I wrong about you? Like, Jesus, are you a dud? like what's going on?" And the thing is that Jesus is doing not what people expected him to do. And Jesus knows this. The ways of God are fundamentally different from the ways of the world. Jesus is not surprised that people aren't getting what he's doing here. They had expectations of who the Messiah would be and what he would do. And they got these expectations from all sorts of prophetic imagery in the scriptures and from their oral traditions, from things they would have been familiar with, like a passage like Psalm 2 or Daniel chapter 2, where you have this victorious king who would defeat the pagans and who would rule and reign. And furthermore, they also had experience with numerous leaders who in their recent memory claimed to be messianic deliverers. They claimed to be the one. And these deliverers of sort, they all exhibited this same kind of typical behavior over and over again, and they would always get whooped. And it's like, well, maybe he wasn't the one, but maybe the next guy will be. But there's still, even though there was some disappointment, there's still this expectation that this is what it would look like when the Messiah comes. So even John, even this last great prophet operating as a second Elijah, he also carried these expectations of Jesus. Now, John himself was a very fiery preacher, eager to aggressively confront anyone and everyone with his message. Like in Luke chapter 3, one of my favorite things about John, Luke chapter 3, he's preaching to the crowd. He's like, "You brood of vipers, who warned you to flee from the coming wrath? Produce fruit in keeping with repentance." Like he's just like, just, 1-2 punch right to the face as he's preaching. I remember, just a little side note, when I was in a Christian school in like my elementary grades, I had to memorize Luke chapter 3. And I remember memorizing Luke chapter 3, and this is like, what is this guy doing? Like, he's picking a fight here. I was even thinking that, as a little kid. And it's true with words like that, like you're really coming hard. It's like you're picking a fight. Now, John would confront, as we see the few things that are written about, John would confront crowds of people. He would confront the tax collectors. He would confront soldiers. He would confront religious leaders. And he even went right to the top and confronts King Herod about some stuff that he's going on. He publicly confronts Herod, which just happens to be the reason why he's in jail in this passage here. Now, John's announcement of the kingdom and that the Messiah, God's true king, were on the way, wherever he went, they were forceful and they were filled with fire. And he expected Jesus to be even more so. Because John's the messenger to prepare, but here's the Messiah. The Messiah will be all that and more. Our mighty warrior king. Well, like the rest of Israel waiting for the Messiah, John looked forward to this moment when Jesus would be the one who would come and confront King Herod, oust him from his throne, and force a takeover, becoming king in his place. John and fellow Israelites expected the Messiah to be a man of power and of might so that he could bring judgment. The expectation on Jesus was that he'd be a man of power and might and that he would bring judgment. They want Jesus to come and kick some ass. They expected judgment on disobedient Israel. They expected judgment upon all the idolatrous pagans, and especially for judgment to come upon the bully Roman government that's occupying their land. Let's deal with those bullies. We'll give them what they deserve. And then after judgment, we'll see, the mercy and the blessing of God, and everything will be great in our land. But after the judgment. Well, Jesus is going by a completely different set of rules. The ways of God are completely different. They are upside down, or right side up from the ways of the world. Jesus jumps ahead in the story here. Jesus sees his messianic vocation through the eyes of prophetic passages like we see in Isaiah about restoration after judgment. Jesus sees the main task of the Messiah to bring the mercy of God first. Little spoiler alert as we get forward in the story, he deals with judgment at the cross. But Jesus sees the main task of the Messiah to bring the mercy of God. Mercy is at the heart of the messianic mission. Mercy is at the core of what the kingdom of God is about and what it looks like. Mercy is the job of the kingdom people. It's what he taught us in chapter 10 and what he released us to do. So Jesus' response to John answers the question like, what kind of Messiah are you? What kind of kingdom is this? What are you doing, Jesus? And Jesus responds by saying, go and tell John what you see and hear. The blind receive their sight. The lame walk. The lepers are cleansed. The deaf hear. The dead are raised. The poor. Like, who goes to them? But here, the poor have good news brought to them. Blessed is anyone who takes no offense at me. Who takes no offense at me for being a Messiah of mercy. I mean, think about that. Offended by mercy. Because there's this thing within us. It's like, but what about? What about those bullies? What about those Romans? Aren't they going to get what they deserve? You're just letting them off the hook. What about Herod and all the wickedness he's done? What about him? When's he going to get it? When are you going to come and kick him down? Hey, what about these guys over here who are making things hard for us? There's an offense at his mercy. Okay, let's continue on here now at verse 7. As they went away, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John. What did you go out into the wilderness to look at? A reed shaken by the wind? What then did you go out to see? Someone dressed in soft robes? Look, those who wear soft robes are in royal palaces. What then did you go out to see? A prophet. Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it is written, see, I am sending my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way before you. Truly, I tell you, among those born of women, no one has arisen greater than John the Baptist. Yet the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. From the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven has suffered violence, and the violent take it by force. For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John came. And if you are willing to accept it, he is the Elijah who is to come. Let anyone with ears listen. So Jesus now addresses the crowds, speaking about John. Now, making note of John's many peculiarities, not the least of which were his odd clothes and his ministering way out in the wilderness, he identifies John as a prophet. Now, this is something that the people could readily accept. They could see from all of those peculiarities, he kind of has the prophet's uniform on, so to speak, and he takes on some of these characteristics. They could see, okay, he's a prophet. Jesus then indicates to the crowd that Israel's long history through Abraham, through Moses, and through the prophets, they're culminating in this very moment that they're in right now. All of those voices in all of Israel's story had been preparing them for the moment that has dawned right now. All of those voices culminating John, all in preparation for this thing that is here. And now Jesus identifies John not only as a prophet, but as the greatest and the final prophet of them all, the Elijah who was to come. John is that prophet that the previous prophets spoke about, as in the one who would prepare the way for the Messiah. Like, this is the moment. This is the moment. And Jesus is getting people now to think deeply about who John is and precisely what kind of prophet John is. Why is that? Because Jesus isn't just talking about John. He's also telling them about himself indirectly. Jesus is being cryptic to avoid an unnecessary confrontation with Herod, or worse, some sort of physical revolution that would be completely out of character with the kind of kingdom that he is trying to bring. Jesus says this cryptic thing here in verse 12, that until now the kingdom of heaven has suffered violence, and the violent take it by force. Now, this passage is not extolling forcefulness or zeal. That's not what it's about. The kingdom suffers violence in the sense that some who look for it are trying to bring it about by violent means. Remember the zealots, one of whom became a disciple of Jesus? That was their thing, constantly seeking to bring it in by force. Constantly singing to bring it by violent means. And likewise, the violence comes then against the kingdom in opposition. So there's a cycle of violence going on. Jesus getting people to think about John and what kind of prophet he is, covertly points to what kind of person that Jesus is. Jesus is the kind of Messiah that doesn't force himself or his authority on people. Jesus is the kind of Messiah that does not force himself on people. He allows people to discover it for themselves as he seeds them information. Matthew's developing a picture of Jesus that he will reveal through the gospel. And the picture is this, is that Jesus does not bully his way into power. This is a fundamental point of character for Jesus. Jesus does not bully his way into power. The way of the kingdom is not through force or through violence or through any kind of coercion. Jesus doesn't bully his way in, and he leads us in that same point of character. Okay, let's continue on in verse 16. But to what will I compare this generation? It is like children sitting in the marketplaces and calling to one another. We played the flute for you, and you did not dance. We wailed, and you did not mourn. For John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say, he is a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, look, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Yet wisdom is vindicated by her deeds. Then he began to reproach the cities in which most of his deeds of power had been done because they did not repent. Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! For if the deeds of power done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. But I tell you, on the day of judgment, it will be more tolerable for Tyre and Sidon than for you. And you, Capernaum, will you be exalted to heaven? No, you will be brought down to Hades. For if the deeds of power done in you had been done in Sodom, it would have remained until this day. But I tell you, on the day of judgment, it will be more tolerable for the land of Sodom than for you. Now, this last section of our passage is quite difficult here. Jesus issues some very strong warnings and a very strong reproach. Now, to give it a little bit of context, warnings about certain kinds of people were not uncommon to ancient Israelites. In the Old Testament, we see numbers of warnings about certain types of people and the kind of harm that they might bring to everyone. And Jesus is specifically referencing two of those Old Testament warnings in particular. First one being, beware and resist false prophets who will deceive you and who will lead you astray from God. And the other warning is, beware of a rebellious son who refused to obey his parents, because that rebellion will bring all kinds of evil upon everyone. In Deuteronomy chapter 1, the law instructs parents of a rebellious son to declare to the elders of their town, this son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He won't obey us. He is a glutton and a drunkard. And then they turn their son over to the town, and the people then must deal with him. Now, when some people levy this accusation against Jesus, they're accusing him of being a rebellious person who's leading Jesus astray, maybe even a false prophet too. The exact opposite accusation is levied against John in his asceticism, his abstaining from eating and drinking and all of these kinds of things. So John's self-denial on one hand, or Jesus celebrating with the wrong people on this side, becomes an excuse for avoidance. Using a saying about children, Jesus clarifies this issue that the invitation is given, but the people are refusing. People are refusing to participate. Jesus is offering a chance to embrace a new way, a different kingdom vision. He was demonstrating it, but they didn't want it. Living it out with laughter and friendship, showing it with powerful healings. No thanks. They didn't want it. So they refused to participate. And so then they hurl these accusations to divert and avoid. The people do not like the challenge of Jesus calling them to repent, to change direction, and to follow an opposite path. And Jesus issues these very strong warnings. Well, why is that? Despite all the deep, authoritative, life-changing teachings he had given, and despite all the healings and deeds of great power that he demonstrated, they rejected his call and they were just bent on going their own way. Hey, that's cool stuff, but I'm still going over here. I'm not going to change my ways. They were following their own vision of God's kingdom, and Jesus knew with perfect clarity where that would lead. Their version of the kingdom was all about revolution. Power against power, politic against politic, bully against bully, weapons, attacks, violence against violence. This is their vision of the kingdom. This is their vision of how the kingdom comes, what it's like. A holy war against the pagans. Love your neighbor, hate your enemy. If he strikes you on the cheek or makes you walk a mile with him, slice him with your sword. This is their kingdom vision, and Jesus sees with perfect clarity where that will lead. So Jesus warns, better to be in Sodom and Gomorrah with fire and brimstone raining down from heaven than to fight God's battles with the devil's weapons. Now, you might be getting sick of hearing this theme as it keeps coming up, and I keep talking about it. But this theme comes up over and over and over in the New Testament, and certainly in Matthew. Why? Because people never end struggling with this thing. We never end struggling with grasping and using power in this way. Power against power, politic against politic, weapon against weapon. Yeah, we just continue to get deceived by the enemy that the only way forward is to play the power games, to do it the devil's way, to use the devil's tools. This same temptation toward power, politic, bullying, weaponization, whether with swords or words, has remained alive and well since Jesus first confronted it. To justify desires to follow the old way, we can even make or remake Jesus into our own image, just so we can walk that way again. We begin to envision Jesus like some sort of John Wayne or American Machine Gun Jesus. I don't know if any of you have ever seen that meme of American Machine Gun Jesus. There's a Canadian Jesus. He's similar to American Machine Gun Jesus, only he frequently apologizes after he kicks you down. Oh, sorry. We're looking for that kind of Jesus, just like they're looking for that kind of Jesus, and we can end up remaking him into our image, where we look for that Jesus to kick the ass of our enemies. Machine Gun Jesus will help me to overpower and to dominate my enemies. He's on my side. How many times do we still continue to hear messages like that, even within the Christian community? Looking for that type of Jesus, looking for that kind of thing. He's on my side. Yet when we read Joshua chapter 5, whose side are you on? Ours or theirs? What does he say? Neither. Jesus is on God's side. Now, not to spoil the story, but Jesus is victorious. He does things completely different than the way that we expect, but Jesus is victorious. So the question becomes, how? How does he do it? When all we can see is this way, how is he victorious? How does he do it? Well, what we see unfolding through Matthew's gospel and we see unfolding through the New Testament is this: Jesus does it not as the warrior king, but as the suffering servant of Isaiah 53, who lays down his life for his friends and his enemies. His warfare is to suffer with and for people, for their healing, rather than being the cause of their wounding and their suffering. When we look at the scene in Revelation 5, what do we see? They hear the Lion of Judah. And when they look, what do you see? The Lamb who was slain upon the throne. When the angels in Revelation 5:12 cry out and worship Jesus, what do they say? Worthy. Worthy is he. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and to receive wealth and wisdom and might and honor and glory and blessing. He's worshipped as worthy, not because of his strength as a lion, but because of his mercy and his sacrifice as a lamb. Worthy is he. Jesus is victorious not through his might, but through his mercy. This is the life and the victory to which we are called to enjoy and to which we are called to freely give. This is the life and the type of victory that we are called to engage our world. This is the path that Jesus is showing towards life. It's not what we expect. It's something different, but it's in the different where we'll finally see the victory that we were always hoping for, that we were always seeking for. Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God." If you'll be a peacemaker, you'll be a chip off the old block. If you'll be a person of mercy, you'll be just like Jesus. And that's where the blessing is found. That's where the victory is found.